Chapter 3, Part 4. The most eminent passant enthusiast was Prince Napoleon's sister, the Princess Mathilde. Princess Mathilde was a redoubtable lady who went in for a variety of hobbies, her current enthusiasm being sculpture. Her sculpture was fairly redoubtable, too, the subjects being of a heroic nature. At the time, she was working on a bust of Minerva, using Madame Agar, who was her close friend, as a model. Agar persuaded the princess to come see the hit at the Odeon, which Matilda did and immediately fell in love with the play and its cast of two. Being a power at court, capital C court, she arranged for a command performance at the Tuileries. It was given after a banquet held in honor of the Queen of Holland and her son, the Prince of Orange, jocularly known as Le Petit Citron. Sarah, Madame Agar, and a stage manager waited some time in a salon adjoining the ballroom where the play was to be given. Sarah kept practicing the deep reverence she would have to make upon being presented to the Emperor and Empress, and was interrupted by Louis Napoleon himself, who had come in unannounced and remarked with amusement, "I liked the way you did it the first time, mademoiselle." To her intense relief, he failed to recognize her as the tactless gymnase ingenue on whose recital of Victor Hugo he and the Empress had walked out 5 years earlier. The play went enchantingly. At the finish, there were 3 curtain calls, which, coming from a court audience, was considered an ovation. There was a slight hitch to the imperial exit from the ballroom, owing to the fact that Eugenie, who was vain about her tiny feet and always wore shoes a size too small for her, had surreptitiously kicked off her tortuous little slippers during the entertainment, and when it was over couldn't get them back on. She had to order a lady-in-waiting to retrieve them, then walked out majestically, her giant hoop skirt concealing her swollen arches. A few days later, by way of appreciation, the Emperor sent Mademoiselle Bernhardt a magnificent brooch bearing the imperial initials in diamonds. Word of the gift got about town, and again the rumors flew, all of which gossip was, of course, nonsense. Madame Agar doubtless received a similar thank-you token from the Tuileries, but Madame Agar was not news, and Sir Bernhardt was. Much of it she thought she brought on herself. She was young and irresponsible, and at times her behavior was that of someone slightly demented. One evening, just before curtain time, her maid, who had come back from an errand, entered the dressing room to find her mistress prone on the floor, pale as wax, and seemingly not breathing. The woman ran out screaming incoherently that Mademoiselle Bernhardt was dead, and the stage manager rushed with her to find out what on earth she was gibbering about, took one look at the lifeless body, and raced out of the box office to summon Decanel, who galloped to the dressing room, knelt down on the floor, and inspected the inert form as best he could. To all intents and purposes, she was indeed quite dead. The commotion had taken some time, and the waiting audience was stamping and whistling in impatience. There was nothing for Decanel to do but step before the curtain and announce the cancellation of the performance due to certain dreadful circumstances. He spoke with such obvious emotion, the house, instead of leaving, remained seated in stunned amazement. The name of Bernhardt was whispered about. Someone said she'd suffered a violent seizure. Someone else speculated she might even be dead. Backstage, the cast, management, and stagehands, most of them weeping, crowded into the mortuary dressing room, and at that the defunct rose, like a lively Lazarus, burst into peals of shrill laughter, and asked how they liked her impersonation of a corpse. Decanel, fuming with rage, had to return before the curtain to inform that there had been a misunderstanding and that the play would go on. It was an idiotic prank, and one that hardly helped Bernhardt's public image. There was additional talk of after her apartment was destroyed in a fire that nearly ended in stark tragedy. She was at the theater when word of the conflagration was brought. She rushed to a waiting cab, which dashed to the Rue Albert as rapidly as the coachman could whip up his horse. By the time she arrived, smoke was pouring out of her front windows. Frantically, she looked about in the gathering crowd, spotting Regina, but failed to see her grandmother, nor, to her horror, any sign of little Maurice. By now, the front doorway was a sheet of flame. Knowing of an entrance off the boulevard Houseman, she ran around the corner, fighting off the people who tried to restrain her, and plunged into the building. Choking and nearly blinded, she made her way to the room in which her grandmother and son were sleeping, shook the old lady awake, wrapped the 4-year-old in a blanket, and with the aid of 2 firemen who had come up a ladder, made an escape in the nick of time. Her action was especially heroic in view of her psychotic fear of fire. The firemen eventually got the blaze under control, but not before it had gutted the 2 overhead floors and seriously damaged a third. Her own apartment was a ruin, with its contents incinerated, including a diamond and pearl tiara given her by a certain Kabil Bey after she recited at one of his soirees. Who Kabil Bey was, other than a Near Eastern millionaire, is not a matter of record. News of the conflagration, and the Bernhardt losses made the headlines and the columns, which, as she became more and more conspicuous, were inclined to print more and more malicious stories about her, implied that she herself had started the blaze in order to collect the insurance. The story was not only malicious, it was ironically untrue. There was no insurance. Sarah, in her careless fashion, had put off signing the policy, and not only had she no claim, she was held for damages to the rest of the building, as the disaster had been caused through one of her servants who carelessly left a lighted candle near a muslin curtain. The amount for which she was sued was 40,000 francs, a king's ransom, and kings came high in those days. She was not unnaturally in despair. Her rich friends were sympathetic, but did nothing about coming to her rescue. Those who eventually did were Decanel and Arthur Mayer, the editor of the aristocratic Gaulois, Gaulois, who together arranged for a benefit. Mayer was a kindly man, also a bit of a snob, who liked nothing better than to busy himself prominently in some fashionable event. He was a friend of Adelina Patti, whom he admired inordinately, not only because she was the greatest singer of her time, but had, through marriage, become the Marquis de Caux. C-A-U-X, Cox. He approached her with a request to sing in the proposed benefit for the bankrupt young actress, and the diva graciously agreed to take part. The name of Patti on the announcements was a magnet to attract tout Paris, and although the tickets were exorbitantly priced, the house was a complete sellout. This, which was the singer's first participation in a benefit for a French artist, endeared her to the public more than ever. Their ovation was almost overwhelming, and she had to repeat Rosina's aria from The Barber of Seville 4 times. Una voce poco fa was to become as much of a theme song for Patti as the Pagliacci Vesti la Giuba would be for Caruso. The admission price for this benefit was not printed on the tickets. Whatever anyone paid was in the nature of a donation, and Sarah cleared 33,000 francs, which was sufficient to pay her debts, if not her current expenses, which were mounting in their carefree fashion. She had now taken a flat in the Rue de Rome, which she equipped at random with furniture donated by friends or purchased on credit, tributes from admirers in the way of paintings and statuary, some of it good, much of it awful, fur rugs, second-hand oriental carpets, potted palms, and always a profusion of flowers. Here she entertained with a lavishness which her finances hardly warranted. Here she started the nucleus of her loyal coterie, which was to develop into her famous court. Here also she started the creation of that baffling and fascinating enigma that was to be the Sarah Bernhardt, a woman of unpredictable facets and moods, one day a legendary faraway princess, and the next a hardy comrade. She could take a warmly sympathetic, even intimate, interest in a friend one day, and a week later greet the same person with the cold detachment of someone being introduced for the first time. Her temper was as volatile as ever. It was nothing for her to hurl a hairbrush at a maid, and next moment, by way of atonement, to hand her a piece of jewelry. Sometimes she seemed a thoughtful adult, almost a scholarly one. Another time she became an irresponsible child, almost a delinquent one. How many of these kaleidoscopic shifts of behavior were offstage acting? It is doubtful if she herself knew. In spite of her boundless energy, Sarah Bernhardt's health was never robust, and during her first 30 years, it was fragile to the degree that would have made an invalid of the average person. She was still subject to fainting spells. Some, to be sure, were brilliantly contrived acts, but others were quite genuine, often brought on by extraordinary causes, one of them boredom. Once at a dinner party, she found herself seated between two excruciatingly tiresome table companions and actually fainted dead away. After a highly emotional scene on stage, she was known to fall unconscious in the wings, not, to be sure, before she had acknowledged the applause of the audience. She also suffered from the far more frightening affliction of attacks of bleeding at the mouth. Whether these came from latent tuberculosis or whatever the cause is not known. After she reached the age of 35, they gradually ceased. Her precarious state of health never for a single day slowed down her dedication to work or her exuberant way of living until one summer when a severe oral hemorrhage so depleted her, the doctors and the theater management ordered her to go to U Bonas for a couple of months and take the cure. It was early summer and the year was 1870. Back in Paris, one heard talk of a man named Bismarck. The words Prussia and Berlin were on everyone's lips. Flags fluttered from windows. Patriots boasted of the invulnerability of our glorious army. Rallies were held on street corners, and the Marseillaise was played at every Marseillaise was played. Dang it. Flags fluttered from windows. Patriots boasted of the invulnerability of our glorious army. Rallies were held on street corners, and the Marseillaise was played at every public gathering. On July 19th, France declared war on Germany, and the city was in a ferment of hysterical elation. Crowds rushed senselessly through the streets shouting, "Ah, Berlin!" They stood in droves along the Champs-Élysées to cheer the lines of marching soldiers who might have doubled as the regimental chorus in the Grand Duchess of Gerolstein when Hortense Schneider sang, "Ah, how I love the military." Gay in their bright red zouave trousers, their sweethearts' flowers stuck in the visors of their kepis, they filed jauntily out through the Arc de Triomphe to meet the oncoming ranks of the Teutonic drab and steel. The story of that tragic encounter and of the ensuing debacle is a matter of familiar history. On September 2nd, the white flag of truce was hoisted up over the conquered town of Sedan. 82,000 bitter and exhausted Frenchmen laid down their arms, and the Emperor of France surrendered his sword to the King of Prussia.